Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namassami. Okay, so it's the beginnings, early days of the winter retreat, and of course Ajahn Yaniko and myself have only just recently got back from Thailand, got back on Tuesday. I know for myself, still jet-lagged, discombobulated. I imagine Ajahn Yaniko the same, although he's younger than me. There. And our time in Thailand was, I think, very fruitful. Opportunity to meet and maintain connections with lay community and monastic communities, and it's very fruitful because I think it's helpful to recognize that we do have a relationship with other communities that are a part of a bigger family, and whether it's in other countries, say like in North America, where there's associated monasteries in the Ajahn Chah tradition, or in Europe, or in Thailand, which is the kind of the origin of our roots. So that being able to maintain that, and then also to the various monks who were from Abhayagiri, Jankovilo, and Sudhiro, Tansudiko, also Tanisipo, who's been plugging in, and they all joined in for all or most of the travels and teachings and retreats that were led there. I gave a couple retreats. There's the short, 4-day retreats, one at Banbun, one at Wat Nanachat, and those were very useful. Also, when we arrived, and there was of course there was a whole gang of people at the airport. It's it's a very long flight. It's 22 hours flight, so you get off the plane and you're not exactly feeling very chatty. And there's and then there's all these people at the airport. But one of the people who was there was Joe, and he, of course, that's for those people who don't know. That's this flowers in the picture is Joe, who's been coming here for years and very much a part of the lay community. And he showed up many days subsequent to that. Many various events in Chonburi, because we went straight out to Ajahn Jandi's monastery, then Ajahn Dan's monastery, and he followed along on that, and then we went back into Bangkok, and he plugged into several events there, so it was really nice to see him, although I did mention to Ajahn Yaniko that he really wasn't looking good, and that proved to be the case. He died of a brain hemorrhage just a couple days ago, and but it was very, I think that his opportunity to be plugging in, he was really, he was very happy, and he was able to renew his connection with us. So that was very. That's a very helpful support for him, memory for him as he transitioned, and he also, in reality, he'd had a kidney transplant. Apparently, it was 18 years ago, and the average is about 15, or sort of the that one can expect. So that he had a good run, and that that's quite. And he really turned his life around completely with his connection with Dhamma. So we had the opportunity to make the contact with different teachers as well, paying respects to Lumpur Liam. First thing we did was dropped into a monastery in Lumpur Liam's home village that I hadn't been for several years, and one of the projects he was working on there at the time was there's like a small river that goes through that area, and anyway, I remember walking around with him, and he was listing out all these plans he had for sort of really channeling the river. It was right beside the monastery, and to be able to, because it was either problematic with flooding or problematic with lack of water. So just sort of setting up a series of dams and channels and ponds and whatnot, and it was ponds. I mean, they're huge, and it was all done. It had just been done like a few months before finished, and it was a multi-year project that was really it would be a great benefit for the whole area as well as for the monastery itself. And then he's also building Achedi, Ajahn Liam, of course, very diligent, efficient. He's already got his death organized. When he dies, they've already got the Chedi ready, and everything's in place. It's not quite finished, but I don't think it'll be that long. And it was interesting going in and seeing it, because I could see it's similar to the Ajahn Chah Jedi, but he's got some very interesting innovations that I immediately noticed, because I was involved in the building of the Ajahn Chah one, and I know the kind of weaknesses or difficulties that we had with it, or that have proved problematic over the years, and he has sorted all that out. And then when we went to pay respects to him, he was very kind to Ajahn Yaniko, and sort of giving him a bit of advice or encouragement, and taking on more duties and more of a role of leadership in our community. And he said, because oftentimes he's quite, how do you say, not stoic, but kind of, he's so even that it's hard to, and he doesn't oftentimes make a big deal of anything. But he did say, it's like, taking on leadership roles and being in a position of responsibility, it can be hard. And he said, but if you never lift anything heavy, then you'll never get strong. And so it was just this sense of encouragement and acknowledging that there are difficulties, and they said, but by taking them on, and this is how you learn and you cultivate wisdom and confidence. So it was very kind. And as we were there, then one of the things, of course, going in for alms round into Bungwai village, and of course I've been going into alms round in Bungwai village for about 45 years, so seeing the village and then the villagers, and I've seen many of them from the time they're very young, and of course they're like one of the women who came to see us off at the airport. She's from Bungwai, and she was. I've known her since she was a little girl, and I know her parents. Her father was one of the people who would always help with construction, and the mother was always at the kitchen, and they're not able to make it to the monastery anymore, and then I saw one of the villagers who he started coming when he would have been. He already had a family, he had kids, and now he's probably in his early 80s probably, but his health hasn't been so good, so he hasn't been able to come to the monastery the last few years, and he would always be there. and he's been coming since day one of Wat Nana Ajahn. But his house is right on beside the Pindabat route, so he'd always come over out in his yard and come over and greet the monks every day, and so anyway, I went over and visited, because this past year, I think it was in the late spring, early summer, I'd heard news that his wife had passed away very suddenly. It's like he's been ill for some time, but then he's still going. But then his wife, I think, had a stroke and passed away quite quickly. So it was very sudden. And she had, up until the time she had a stroke, she was still going to the monastery every single day and preparing food in the kitchen. And so I asking him how he was doing, and then said, I heard that Mat Hong passed away. Really sorry to hear that. I can offer my condolences. How are you doing? How's your, how are your spirits? How's your heart? And he said, "Oh, I'm fine." He said, you know why I'm fine? He says, because I know that Mat Hong was born, so she had to die, and that was, and it was just this smile on his face, and it wasn't how do you say, said in a it was very sincere and very, very genuine. So it was so somebody has been steeped in the teachings, living the practice for such a long time, was just really, really, really solid. I remember one time he and I and one other person, there'd been somebody, there was one other monk and one other lay person, there'd been somebody, this early days of Wat Nana Ajahn, there'd been somebody who was hit by a tour bus right in front of on the highway just in front of the monastery. And they brought him straight into the monastery. And most of the villagers were afraid to deal with it, or to get their minds around it, and because it was such a sudden death, and but anyway, it was him and myself and one other monk and one other layman, and we cleaned the body because it was a mess. And cleaned the body up and prepared it for the cremation the next day, and he wasn't. He's already the sense of solidity and fearlessness in him. So that sort of continues, and I think that you're just reflecting on. And of course, Ajahn Yaniko was his talk on the One Prat night a couple nights ago was, just reflecting on death, the importance of reflecting on death, and internalizing the reality of death, and not in a way that's kind of macabre or obsessed in some way, but it's more like really taking in the whole spectrum of this human existence, and really seeing, well, what is really of value when one really recognizes that death is inevitable, And how do we live our life in a way that we're not unshaken and we're truly at peace. And that requires it requires investigation. It requires an opening of the heart to the realities of our fear, uncertainties, doubts that we have about everything, really, and then how do we work with that, and what do we do? Because the habit or the tendency is to distract ourselves in some way, or to find trying to, because we're as human beings, we really we need to feel happiness. We need to experience pleasure. I mean, that's a fundamental part of our existence, and if we don't find any higher pleasures or any other stable forms of happiness, then we look to either sensual pleasures, some kind of gratification, some kind of status, some kind of symbol of that we're okay, some kind of enjoyment that at least occupies the mind. And oftentimes, because we haven't reflected on it deeply, or haven't really paid attention to the cycles of and the fundamental system of how, say, pleasure works, or happiness works, or how suffering works, then we opt for that which is pretty shallow and inconsequential, insubstantial, and it's very natural, but it isn't much of a refuge when we do experience loss or difficulty in some way, and that. And the Buddha, of course, over and over throughout the suttas, the Buddha points to, especially with sensual sense pleasures, to pay attention to the origin, the arising of sense pleasures, but pay attention to the ceasing of them. Pay attention to the gratification that's there. Pay attention to the danger, and pay attention to the escape, the way out. And so the Buddha isn't, even though there is a tendency for people to think that because the Buddha reiterates over and over again, I teach two things: suffering and the ending of suffering. Is that Buddhism is just about suffering, but it really the Buddha really puts a tremendous emphasis on really understanding this sense of pleasure. What is pleasurable? What's the arising? What's the origin of our happiness? Where does it come from? How does it end? How are we separated from it? Because that's a form of suffering that the Buddha points to. It's like separation from happiness. When we're separated from the pleasurable, separated from our well-being, then we experience suffering because we've lost what we thought we had. Um, and of course that's one of the dangers, but also the Buddhists point to the gratification in the sense of, there's something very satisfying, but also realizing that there is happiness and there is pleasure that is quite innocent, is quite uplifting. It's quite it is untainted by the unwholesome or the unskillful. But then there's also freedom from the whole package, and that's what the Buddha is pointing to, say, like the escape or the freedom. And when the Buddha points to say, so he says, I abandon sense pleasures. I remove the fever for sense pleasures. I dwell without thirst, with a heart steeped in peace, the heart dwelling in peace. And it's something that is it's like, because oftentimes we think the absence of something is a nothing. So like, if I didn't have sense pleasures, then I wouldn't have anything. If I didn't have that happiness of gratification, then it wouldn't have anything. But the Buddha is saying, no, there's something beyond, and so that the ability to step back from something, it opens up possibilities of that which is more refined, and they say, like, the delight of not, like when you're thirsty, you're really thirsty, and your thirst is quenched. Like the Buddha uses that image of thirst, abandoning thirst or being free from thirst. And when you're thirsty and your thirst is quenched, there's that immediate pleasure that you get from that sensation of having quenching the thirst. But then after that, the kind of well-being and ease and kind of peace that one feels because one is no longer thirsty is something we tend not to pay attention to it or to even dwell on it very much. But you start realizing, it's that freedom from thirst is extremely comfortable and easeful, and so it's similar to with the that abandoning of removing the fever for for sense pleasure, and the mind, the heart dwelling in peace, and so that relinquishment or renunciation of sense pleasure is not just a giving up or relinquishing or turning away from, but is an embracing and understanding of the benefits of the heart that is still and clear, and there's a fullness there. And you think of when we think of so oftentimes the part of the imagery is sort of that relinquishing, emptying the heart, emptying the mind, and it's not a nothing that we experience. It's a fullness because we're being able to have space for real peace and unshakability, the unshaken heart, the heart that is completely steady and clear. And it's so, oftentimes that's so unfamiliar, or that it's hard to even conceive of. But I think it's worth exploring that. There's that whole spectrum of seeing the arising, the ceasing, the gratification, the danger or the drawback, and then the way out. What is the way out? What is the and of course, the way out is always this path of practice of living the Dhamma and the that sense of releasing the entanglements and attachments that we have. And again, it's not a pushing away, but it's sort of seeing its problematic nature and be willing to not entangle oneself in what is problematic, or not entangle oneself in that which is complicated. As we do complicate our hearts, our minds with that outward going seeking of gratification, of pleasure, but there's a more subtle pleasure of being able to be present with what we're experiencing. There's a subtleness to the pleasure of the heart being at peace, and that clarity of understanding that comes from that. So it's these are I think worthy avenues of exploration, and was something that was, again, to me it was striking, seeing both Lumpur Liam, that Posa Om, the layman in Bung Wai, and other people as well, monks and lay people who living the lives of Dhamma and being really fulfilled. The last day that we were in Thailand, we went to pay respects to the Sangharaja, the Supreme Patriarch, and he's he's quite special. I've met him a few times now, and he's always been incredibly warm and very welcoming. He's but he was really interested in what we're doing, and gave us some. There was a group of us, monks and lay people, who went, but as a kind of a delegation from Abhayagiri, and he was just very encouraging, very very warm. And then at the very end, he gave this. He gave us some gifts, and little Buddha image, and he chanted a blessing, and generally I'm pretty how do you say? I'm not all that sort of intuitive or yeah. But anyway, I just felt this incredible waves of loving kindness coming from him, and the chant that he was doing was one that I wasn't familiar with anyway, but it was still there was something that was really special about it, and I was just feeling these waves of joy, and then after he asked, "Have you ever heard that chant before?" And I said, "No, I never heard of it." So anyway, he gets out his books and he shows the chant, and it was just a very sweet moment, and he started to point out where the translation is, and so he was he went off to his bookcase off to the side. There was a wall of bookcases, but just this kind of care and concern. And here's somebody who is in a very almost a very much a ceremonial position, revered position, and I think it's a sort of position that you could easily be just get really bored of very quickly, and but I think he really brings this kind of freshness to his meeting of people, and I'm sure people show up there wanting some kind of blessing from him all the time, but he's I think he takes it on in a really admirable way, and he's 91 now, so he's no spring chicken, and just this Kurdish giving of energy and kindness to us was a real blessing, a really lovely way to end our time in Thailand. So anyway, those are some thoughts, impressions that still resonate from my trip to Thailand. So offer it for the reflection this evening.